Look, if you feel like your money doesn't go as far as it used to, you're not imagining it. Your salary might be higher than ever. Your savings might be growing. And yet, life somehow feels more expensive. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're paying a tax that you never agreed to. No bill, no vote, no warning. And most people don't even realize it's happening. In this video, I'm going to break down what inflation actually is in plain English, why it quietly makes you poorer over time, how it sometimes benefits certain people, and most importantly, how to position yourself so inflation works for you instead of against you. Because here's what most people don't realize. Inflation isn't just an economic concept. It's one of the most powerful forces shaping your entire financial life. My name is Grant. If you're someone who feels like you're working harder but getting ahead slower, or you're trying to understand why everything keeps getting more expensive, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Because once you see how this system really works, you won't look at money the same way again. Alright, let's strip away all the complicated definitions. Inflation simply means your money buys less over time. That's it. If a coffee costs $3 today and $3.30 next year, that's inflation. Now, you might be thinking, okay, prices go up, that's normal. Yes, but here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just prices going up, it's the value of your money going down. Simple math example. Let's say you have $10,000 in savings. Inflation is 3% per year. After 1 year, your money doesn't feel different, but in reality, your purchasing power is now $9,700. You just lost $300, and you did nothing wrong. Now stretch that over 10 years. At 3% inflation, $10,000 becomes worth about $7,400 in purchasing power. You didn't lose money on paper, but in real life, you lost over 25% of your wealth, silently. Now, why does this even happen? Here's the official explanation. Inflation happens because of increased demand, higher production costs, economic growth. And yes, those are partially true. But here's what most people don't realize. A major driver of inflation is money creation. When more money is added into the system, each individual unit becomes less valuable. Think of it like this. If there are 10 pizzas and 10 people, everyone gets one slice. If there are still 10 pizzas, but now 20 people, each slice becomes smaller. Same idea with money. Real-world example. Between 2020 and 2022, massive amounts of new money were created globally. In the US alone, trillions of dollars were added to the system, and shortly after, we saw inflation spike to levels not seen in decades. Coincidence? Not really. Now here's where it gets dangerous, because inflation doesn't just affect numbers, it affects behavior. 1. It encourages spending. If people believe money will lose value, they're more likely to spend it quickly. Why save if it's losing value anyway? This creates a cycle. Spend more. Prices go up. Inflation increases. 2. It punishes patience. Saving used to be rewarded. Today, saving without strategy often means you're slowly losing purchasing power. 3. It creates illusions of wealth. You might feel richer because your salary increased, your house value went up, your investments grew. But if inflation is high, you're often just keeping up, not getting ahead. Let's be honest here. Inflation doesn't affect everyone equally. If your money is sitting in a bank, earning little to no return, inflation is quietly eating it. If your income doesn't adjust with inflation, you're effectively getting a pay cut every year. People who react too late usually end up paying the highest prices. Now this is the part that surprises people. Inflation isn't just destructive. For some people, it's incredibly profitable. Asset owners. If you own assets like real estate, businesses, stocks, their prices often rise with inflation. Why? Because they represent real value. People with debt. This is where it gets really interesting. Let's say you owe $200,000 on a mortgage. If inflation rises, the value of money decreases. That means you're paying back your debt with cheaper dollars. Same debt, less real burden. People who move early. Those who understand inflation early position themselves before prices adjust. And that's where the real advantage is. Now, everything we've talked about so far is normal inflation. 2%, 3%, maybe even 5%. Annoying, but manageable. But sometimes, the system breaks, and inflation doesn't move slowly anymore. It accelerates. Let's go back to Germany in the early 1920s. After World War I, the government printed enormous amounts of money to deal with debt. At first, it didn't seem catastrophic. Prices went up, people adjusted. But then, something changed. Inflation started compounding on itself. Prices doubled, then doubled again. Workers were paid multiple times per day. People rushed to spend money immediately, because waiting even a few hours meant your money was worth less. At one point, people literally used stacks of cash as fuel, not because they were careless, because the money was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Now here's a story that feels much more modern. Early 1990s Russia. The Soviet Union collapses, the system resets, and inflation explodes. Imagine this. You sell your apartment, your entire life savings, now sitting in cash. You think you've secured your future, but within months, that cash starts losing value fast. You try to wait. You think, let me decide carefully what to buy. Big mistake. Because by the time you act, that money can no longer buy another property, or even something close. There are real stories of people who sold homes and ended up using the money to buy things like refrigerators, appliances, anything physical. Not because they needed them, but because they were desperately trying to park value somewhere. Think about that. A lifetime of work, reduced to a fridge. This is where it gets really interesting, because the mistake wasn't selling. The mistake was holding cash too long in a collapsing currency. That couldn't happen here, right? Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that's extreme. That's history. Let's bring this closer to home. Turkey, not so far away. In recent years, Turkey has experienced extremely high inflation. We're talking 40%, 60%, even higher at times. And here's what happens in a situation like that. Rent adjusts constantly. Prices change weekly. Salaries struggle to keep up. People don't want to hold cash. They move into real estate, foreign currencies, physical goods, anything that holds value better than money. And the key point is this. This didn't happen 100 years ago. This is happening now. Now let's talk about the US, Western Europe. Over the last few years, inflation surged to levels not seen in decades. In the US, around 8 to 9% at peak. In parts of Europe, even higher in some countries. And here's what most people don't realize. Even when inflation comes down, prices don't go back. That $5 item that became $6 usually stays $6. So even temporary inflation creates permanent increases in cost of living. And this is where people get caught. They think, okay, inflation is under control now, but their expenses? Still elevated. Their savings? Already devalued. Look, you don't need to predict hyperinflation. You don't need to panic, but you do need to change how you think. Because here's the mistake most people make. They think in nominal terms. How many dollars do I have? But the real question is, what can those dollars actually buy? That's purchasing power, and inflation quietly erodes it, year after year. Now, let's be practical. No complicated strategies, just better positioning. 1. Cash is not a long-term strategy. Cash feels safe, it's stable, it doesn't move. But that's exactly the problem. Over time, it's almost guaranteed to lose value. 2. Value needs to live somewhere. Look at every example we just discussed. Germany, Russia, Turkey. The people who suffered most were the ones holding cash too long. The people who adapted moved into things that held value better. Now, you might be thinking, so what exactly counts as value? That's the key question, and it usually comes down to things like scarcity, utility, demand. 3. Your income matters more than you think. Inflation hits harder if your income is rigid. If your salary barely changes, but your expenses rise every year, you're slowly getting squeezed. This is why adaptability matters. Skills, flexibility, leverage, because inflation doesn't wait. 4. Time is either helping you or hurting you. Here's what most people don't realize. Inflation compounds, just like investments. So if you ignore it for 10 to 20 years, the damage is massive. But if you understand it early, time starts working for you. Let's be honest. Inflation isn't an accident. It's not a glitch. It's built into the system. Because it helps. Reduce the real burden of debt. Keep economies moving. Encourage spending. But the cost is quietly transferred to people who don't adjust. And that's why it feels unfair. Because it is. So here's the real question. Not, is inflation happening? But, where am I standing while it happens? Because history is very clear. Some people get wiped out. Some people stay stuck. And some people quietly benefit. Same system, different outcomes. And the difference usually comes down to one thing: understanding what's actually going on before it's obvious. If this changed how you see money, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. And if you want to understand which assets and decisions actually protect your purchasing power over time, you should definitely watch the next video. Because once you see that, you stop reacting too late and start making moves before everyone else does.